Welcome back to Echoes and Edges, the Broken and Beautiful podcast. I'm Patria, and this is a space where we explore the stories that shape us and the healing that helps us come home to ourselves. In our last conversation, Daniel and I talk about how shame forms, how it attaches to identity, hides inside secrecy, and teaches us to believe that parts of us are simply too much, too little, or too wrong to be loved. We also began exploring how healing starts as shame loosens its grip through compassion, curiosity, and safe connection. In this conversation, we take the next step. We ask, what happens when the parts of us shame tried to bury begin to come back to life? Daniel shares the powerful shift of moving from seeing his wildness as destructive to understanding it as dangerous, not harmful, but no longer controlled or controllable by systems that depended on his silence. Welcome back. I'm so glad you're here. A lot of people listening grew up being told that parts of themselves were problems, right?
Yep.
Their emotions were too big. Their questions were too threatening. Their instincts were too disruptive, or like we were just kicking around, like thinking out loud. Is it rambling or is it just being in community? You know, there's these ways that shame teaches us how to bury important parts of us. So I'm curious, what did it look like for you to begin reclaiming that wildness? And maybe even a better first question is, talk a little bit more about the difference between what you mean by wild and dangerous, and then about that reclamation.
Yeah. I mean, that was a big perspective switch for me, that going from destructive to dangerous. And the way that worked for me was I was labeled as wild, which really what they were saying about me as a kid was that I was out of control. I was too much. I was a troublemaker, rebellious. Okay? So I wasn't fitting within whatever the system was. And so I was this wild child. And what happened to me there was then I am trying not to be wild. I'm trying to be in control because that my attachment is threatened if I act out. And so I want to be in control, but so I'm stuffing all of my emotions, I'm stuffing my feelings, stuffing that. And then what happens, of course, is it boils over and then I act out. And then I get punished for that. And then the cycle is, okay, well, there's something wrong with you because you just can't get control. You got to get control of this. You've got to be better. You can't lash out. You can't be violent. And so it's just this cycle that is really destructive because the way I would act out was violence often, or yelling, or something like that. So it was a very destructive acting out. And that narrative of that I am wild and that wild means destructive stayed with me through all the way into my 30s. And mostly that was turned inward because that was a way I could control it. It was being violent with myself, being violent with shame towards myself to try and control what's happening, to try and stop me from acting out or stop me from feeling too much or being too much. And every once in a while, it spills over into violence or rage towards other people, or towards acting out towards other people, like my wife or my kids or friends or other people. And so when I started to heal, what I realized is that wild is dangerous because it's not controllable. Like, wild animals are a threat. People see them as a threat. People see the wilderness as a threat because it feels out of control to them. And so we live in these environments, these urban environments where everything is controlled and everything is safe, and then it's not a threat. But anything that's wild, anything that lives outside of the system is a threat because of the destruction that it could cause. And so we live in this fear of the animals, or we live in this fear of bears. But what happens is when we understand that the symbiosis that we all live in together, that a bear, just because you see it, it's not destructive. Yeah, there's some danger there, if you don't know if it's got little bears with it and it's a mama bear, there's danger there. But the bear is not wanting to be destructive. It is just wanting to live its life. It's just wanting to protect its babies. It's just wanting to find food. And so that right in there lies the difference. Things that are outside of control are dangerous. And when I accepted that this place that I yes, I am wild, that makes me dangerous to systems, especially systems of oppression. Because when I find my safety inside myself and I don't need to be regulated by a system or by a rigid system of beliefs, when I am outside of that, then I'm out of their control. And when I'm out of their control, I'm a threat. I'm dangerous. So I can live from this wild place, which is the truth about it is that I don't like to follow rules. In fact, if somebody tells me a rule, then my automatic reaction is I'm not going to do that. Now that I have some agency and choice in my reactions in those places, I get to choose whether I'm going to follow the rule or not. But the way that my mind works, the way that I work, as I've learned about myself, is that I see things that don't work. I see things that are unjust. I see things that are inefficient. And my want is to have justice and to see things work in the most efficient way. And that's the gift of the wildness, is that I don't just automatically follow whatever is happening. And if people could understand that, then that gift is available to them. But for my system that I grew up in, it was very rigid. It was like, it has to be this way or else. It's very destructive.
I'm hearing something about your way of seeing the world was a threat to that system that you were in. And so a kid, as you were, had these, and of course you developed and formed around these circumstances. So even as an adult, though you pushed harder against the system, then maybe you use that really important word of choose. Then maybe you could choose or not to choose if you had containment or welcome for the way that you are.
No, I think you said it really beautifully. I think the way that I think about it right now, which is helpful to me, is that the two things that we need, Gabor Mate, I love the way he says it, two things that we need as kids are attachment and authenticity. However, if our attachment requires us to be something, we will give up our authenticity in order to stay attached, because our attachment equals survival. And that's that attachment and belonging, they're right there together. And so I would say what was happening to me is that in order to attach, I had to give up my authenticity, which I can't remember exactly how you said it, but I love the way you said it there, because that's exactly what would happen to me. And giving that up is like, I can't not be who I am, and I'm trying desperately to conform to what I need to stay attached.
Yeah. So what I was kind of drawing out of that was the overexpression of the rage or the anger, which rage is an overexpression of anger, perhaps.
Yes.
Was because of the lack of containment of who you were.
Exactly.
And so that authentic you is dangerous, is wild. You're like that's what I hear you saying is you're just a person. Like that mama bear, you're just a person trying to be a person as you were designed to be. And so that over formation of anger response was part of what you've had to process and kind of reclaim. Without also, and you didn't say this, but I would just guess without becoming smaller. That there's a way that we have to find containment for our wildness, which I think of as our authenticity. I think of those as very similar to I think is what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's not exactly like the animals. I don't think we have belly buttons and most of them don't, but it's really similar. And that's just such a great view that you're offering to switch, it's like it enlarges the space for people to be authentically who they are and be able to stay attached. That's what you're learned. And so when you say dangerous, that's what you mean. Is there is an ability, capacity to be dangerous here. Like there's a capacity to harm and to hurt, but that's not the deepest truth about who we are.
No, it's not. I don't think authentically that's what we want to do. I think authentically what we want is connection. What we want is attachment and secure attachment, which requires connection and love and all those things. And so that's what I would say is the core of who we are. And we have to move into violent places when we are not allowed to be authentic.
Many people, as you and I know through our years of work and just through our own experiences, we've kind of discussed in the previous episode, and written about, and like we have, we both have some platform in the world. So we know that many people grow up in systems, families, churches, schools, cultures, where certain parts of them are labeled as problems, like yours was. And for me, it was emotions, as I shared in the last one. It was just generally having emotions at all. And so sensitivity, intensity, curiosity, emotional depth are all potential targets for, things that don't tame well. Right? So what do you think systems are actually reacting to when they label those parts as too much?
Yeah. I think systems, especially our familial and our cultural and our religious systems, are primarily about creating regulation for us. Because we long for that, we need it. And so it's provided through a system. And so when a system says someone is too much, it's because they're outside of their control. They're outside of the system's control. And in order...
Would you say, can I interrupt you right there? Because I want to hover over regulation for just a second, because it's so important what you just said.
Yep.
When a child, in this case, we're talking about a child, is too big or too much or like labeled that way, the system or the person is dysregulated. The adult is dysregulated. Yes,
that's right.
So everyone becomes dysregulated.
That's right.
And so...
because the child's relying on the regulation of the parent. Yeah.
Of the parent. Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to put... And then if you could just say a couple sentences about what you mean by regulation, because again, I think the world could be saved through regulation. So I just kind of want to hover over that. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I mean by regulation is that as humans, we have emotions. And so when we have experiences in life that raise those emotions or are stressful, and our stress response is heightened cortisol levels, our heart rates go up, our emotions go up. And what our system needs in those moments is to be down-regulated from those hyperactive places. And so the stress goes down, the cortisol levels go down, heart rate goes down. That's what regulation is at its core. It's just a down movement of stress. And so life is full of that. And if we aren't able to regulate ourselves, we need something to regulate us. And that is primarily what systems provide, is a place of regulation.
So maybe you already said this, but yeah, just to revisit that question particularly, what do you think those systems are actually reacting to when they label those parts as too much? And I do want to just add a quick caveat for the hypo-aroused among us, because I think you and I both are identifying as hyper. We go hyper, and a lot of people go numb or quiet or hide. So they might be too little. So this is the same answer.
Same answer.
I just want listeners to hear that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Well, you're dysregulating the system.
Yeah.
And so the system is reacting to its own dysregulation. My philosophy professor described it as everything is built on a three-legged stool. If you threaten one of the legs of that stool, you're threatening everything that's built on top of that. So we each have a leg, we each have 3 legs of our stool that our life, our ideology, our belief systems are built on. If I threaten one of those pillars of the stool, everything comes crashing down. And most of us, if we've walked some sort of healing, we've had that happen to us already. Like our life system and belief system crashes down, and then we have to kind of rebuild it. But the systems are built on those same pillars. And so when you are out or you're too much for a system, it's because you're threatening one of the pillars of the control. And if they can't let that happen, because if the system loses that, then it loses its regulation. And that is such a powerful survival mechanism.
Right. It feels final and fatal. So the image that came to my mind right there was like, what is the worst that happens if a system loses its regulation? And if it has a lot of power, really bad things can happen. Like there are good reasons. And at the same time, you might just fall off the chair, like it might just be a bump. It might not be final and fatal, but the contraction of the system then is what you're describing to maintain control, which then over controls the little person.
That's right. And I think if a parent is relying on a system to regulate themselves, and then you're too much as a child threatens their regulation, it's not conscious. This is not a conscious thing that's happening. It is it's unconsciously. They cannot let that happen. And in order for them to be able to find their own place of regulation, they have to heal. And so if they haven't healed, they have no ability to even let that happen, let you tear that down. If you do, then you've completely taken them out of control themselves. And if they had their own trauma, what we all know is that out of control is a terrifying place to live.
Yeah. It puts you in touch with that feeling of powerlessness, which is anathema to feeling okay.
Exactly.
So that's so helpful, Daniel. Thank you. And I'm thinking about shame. So
yes.
As a bridge here, if you could kind of share a couple thoughts about how does shame show up then for the little one who's being called too much or too little, or maybe some of both.
Right. Or both. Yeah.
Or both.
Right. Well, I think when a system is breaking down, it needs a powerful tool to bring things back together. And shame is the most powerful of tools to control a human being. And so shame enters the equation whenever that like you're not okay because you're too much. That becomes an identity place. So we take on the narrative that is being taught to us about who we are. So for example, I'm being taught that I'm wild, but I'm not being taught that I'm wild in the good way that I've found. What I'm being taught is that my wildness is destructive. And so my identity becomes I'm destructive. And so the shame keeps me away from being destructive. Like it helps to control this place of who I think I am. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. You want to keep going and kind of restate so that it feels more finished to you?
Yeah.
Because I'm following.
Okay. So the question again was, how does shame enter the equation? Is that what you said?
How does shame enter the equation? And I'll just give you the follow-up question too here, which is if shame teaches us to disconnect from our instincts and emotions, what does it look like for someone to begin reconnecting with those? So that's where I want to head.
Yeah, that's where we're heading. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So our identity is really, really important because that's the piece of us that either leaves us controllable or makes us uncontrollable. And so a shame-based identity is a controllable identity because it needs external input to be okay. If there's something wrong with me, then I need something outside of me to tell me that I am okay. So that shame equation is powerful because it keeps you controllable by whatever the system is.
So in some ways, I hear you saying that acting out, quote unquote, for children, so rage
Mm-hmm.
is, and it's anti-shaming. Like it's trying to push against the shame to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I don't know if that's exactly following you, but
Mm-hmm.
it's an idea that's coming to my mind, that because shame actually, I don't, and I think we talked about this in the first episode a little bit as well, but I don't think that it's bad by nature.
Right. Yeah.
It's an emotion.
Yeah. It's an emotion,
And so,
and it's a powerful control. It's a powerful emotion that can be used to control people. And when your system doesn't offer freedom because it's too rigid or it's oppressive and it needs that control in order to survive or to keep its narrative going that regulates the people that are living in it, then shame is a very powerful tool to weaponize against people. Because I agree with you. I don't think shame is bad. And I think, in fact, we often pick up on the shame that we were told about ourselves, and then we use that against ourselves to help us protect ourselves from the harm. Right. So, for example, for me, that would be protecting myself from the punishment. Because if I'm myself, if I'm authentic to myself, then I'm going to be punished. And so I'll pick up on the shame that they were giving me, and then I'll use that shame to control myself so that I don't get punished. Help to keep myself safe there. Yeah. So shame enters that equation. I think when we talk about shame, like we did last episode, we're talking about, instead of the difference between guilt and shame is this: shame is I am bad at the core of who I am. There's something wrong with me that keeps us in a spiral of shame.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so
it's like a snowball effect.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Like the same kind of thing as the snowball effect for me was, I act out, I get punished. I double down on trying not to act out. Then I act out and I get punished. And part of what you were saying was that the acting out is like a fight against the system. But I think the acting out is also because we're repressing ourselves so much that we can't help but explode. Like if you push so much, you can only push so much into a container before it's full. And then if you keep trying to push into the container explodes. And that's how I would see it for myself. It's like I'm living in this eternal angst and frustration that my entire life, it feels like that. It feels like that's my state of being, is angst and frustration, because I'm never allowed to be who I am. I'm always getting in trouble for these things that I'm like, I don't even know what I did. I don't know what's happening. And I can't stop. I just can't stop doing it. And so my acting out would come from these places of, I can only keep it at a frustration level for so long before it just explodes. That's what my acting out was. It was like repress, explode, and then I have space again to repress. So, I can like white knuckle it for 2 or 3 weeks or 2 or 3 days, and then explode. So I think it can be that. It can be just the explosion of what we're repressing, but I also think it can be it can be like a desperate plea for attention. The acting out can be like, just give me some attention, especially if you're on that other side where it's hypo arousal and you're never seen and you're never heard, but the people that you're seeing over here, they're always getting the attention because they're dramatic and whatever is happening. That happened to my brothers and sisters too. It's like, Daniel's getting all this attention, so how do I get attention? Well, then I'm going to act out to get the attention. Mine's coming from a place of explosion, from repression. Theirs is coming from a place of, that's how we get attention.
Our needs met.
Yeah.
That's how we get attached or maintain attachment. Yeah. And of course, we're retrofitting adult language, high level adult language to a child experience. It's a very simplistic, kind of one dimensional experience as a child, because everything is their fault, again, developmentally. And so I think you really touched on these things I really wanted to explore with this particular aspect of like where does the shame start showing up and how, and where does that usually begin? And I think you really put really good words to that.
Okay, good.
And yeah, so we talked about secrecy as one of the ways that shame protects itself. And so that's maybe the one aspect I'd like to talk a little bit more about here is that, like, how does secrecy keep that cycle that you were just describing in place? Why do we keep it secret? And what role does compassion and safe relationships then play?
So that the secondary question that you were asking is, what's the start? Where do we start when we know that shame, we have that shame core, or we know that shame is a big part of it? And I think the important place to start is building in ourselves a grounded identity. And that begins with treating ourselves with delight and honor. And then when we don't, we're able to repair with ourselves. And this ties right into the next part, which is compassion. Because compassion is the beginning. When we start to have compassion for ourselves in places where we've always had these shame messages, that's a beginning of how compassion plays out. Because we need safety and to start to come out of hiding, and we need trust to come out of hiding, for those places in us to even have an opportunity to say, okay, it might be different. Maybe there's not something wrong with me. We need safety and trust to start to see that life could be a different way, because one of the foundations of our stool has been something's wrong with me. Because when something is wrong with me, I can control something. So it takes me out of powerlessness. If there's nothing wrong with me, and it's other things that were the problem, that leaves me powerless to change. And we just can't live that way as children. And so we automatically take on that message of, okay, it must be me.
Yeah.
So then to come out of that, we have to have this gentle move towards, well, maybe it's not you. Maybe you're not the problem.
As we come to the end of this part of the conversation with Daniel, there's something that feels really important to name. What we've been talking about here isn't just healing in the sense of repairing something that was broken. It's also about, and mainly about, recovering what was always there. Those parts of you learned to adapt, and in that adaptation, sometimes we can actually over attune, which is also called hypervigilance. We can become hypervigilant in order to protect ourselves and to survive something necessarily. But in that adaptation, we maybe got separated from our gifts, or the gifts became so tangled with the adaptation that we don't know what's up and what's down. And what I hear so clearly in what Daniel shared is that healing isn't about becoming someone new. And I agree with that. It's about untangling what was shaped by survival from what was always true about you, so that what once functioned as protection can begin to function as an offering of your gifts to the world. You can feel purposeful, or you can feel loved because of your sensitivity or your awareness or your creativity or your ability to mediate conflict or your wildness, your inability to be controlled. These aren't things to learn about to control or hide anymore, but as something that brings life to you, an abundance of life, a way of living life and not hiding or experiencing the need to hide. And that's where this conversation really shifts, because once we begin to experience ourselves that way, not as problems to fix, but as people, human people carrying something really good and even essential for one another, then things begin to change. Join me next time for even more of this conversation. See you there.